So again, this is what we had been going over a week or so ago. I don't know, maybe it was longer than that. We had gone through parts 1, 2, and 3 on this. Part 1 was the overview and creating the project for the MVC3 music store. We did that. Part 2, we went in and added controllers. We did that. Part 3, we went in and did the views and view models. I believe we've got, everybody should be up till that point, which brings us up to Part 4. All right, in Part 4, we actually bring in the database to this. All right, now, you may not remember, but last week, and I can resend it if you can't find it, but last week I sent you all an email, and that email, I said it's back a ways. It should be this email right here that was labeled 11/28/2017. If you can't find it, let me know. I can resend it to you. All right? But what should be in that email, if we take a look, is it's got this in it. If you look up on the screen here, the first thing is it's got this connection string that we're going to need to drop in. We're not going to do it exactly like that. We're going to, and I want to explain why in just a couple minutes. But that's the first thing that's in there. Next, the comments for this I've already written, so we'll just be able to drop those in when we get all done. All right. But the main thing that's in there is this sample data.cs, because what that file is, I don't know where it went. But what that file is, try it again, is all the data for the database. All right. Is there anyone who can't find that file that needs it resent to them? It's fine. I don't mind doing it. All right. If you do have the file, then make sure that, or the folder, make sure you've got that folder available to you on your desktop or near wherever you have the project right now. All right? All right, so let's do this a little bit differently, and that is let's walk through everything we're going to do first. Just spend a few minutes doing that. All right, so again, it says here Part 4 covers models and data access. I don't want to read a lick to you. But the author says, hey, we used dummy data before where you had to enter stuff yourselves. We don't want to do that. That's not very reminiscent or reflective of the way life really is. So instead, we're going to be using a database. Now, don't worry that they talk about using the compact edition. It's fine. All right? I think I mentioned to you last week, I'm saying it again, that one reason I wanted us to go through this particular example is what we did before, what we did with the that Rankin one that you did for your second assignment, that was database first. We created the database and then built the model classes around that. Now we're doing it the opposite. All right, we've already built the model classes. We did that in the last part of this series that we just previously went over. So now we're going to add the database to it without really having to add anything ourselves. All right. And they've got a term for it that they call it POCO. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is, again, if you ever are going for a job where they ask you, or you're actually going for a job for ASP.NET or anything Microsoft, they may think that you know what CLR means. I'm going to guess right now, I'm not going to ask, but I'm going to guess none of you know what it means. The CLR is the Microsoft, it literally is an acronym that stands for Common Language Runtime. All right. Next semester, we're going to be working with Java. And with Java, you work with something called the virtual machine. What the virtual machine and CLR both are basically it's the way that you convert the code that you put in into machine code that the computer can run. All right. I mean, I'm making it. I'm really boiling it down to like a sentence or two. You can go and you can look it up, and you might find it's not exactly that definition is not the exact same one that Microsoft gives. That's fine. All right. But what they're saying here is we are going to create the database on the fly from our classes. Now, in order to do that, there's a few things we're going to have to do if you look up on the screen. The first is, right now in the artist class, we have only a name. That's it. That would not make a good primary key. You're all smart enough to know that. That wouldn't make a good primary key. So we're going to add this field, which is basically going to act like our primary key, an artist ID. All right. Then we're going to update the album class. I think right now all that the album class has in it, I believe, are like the genre and the artist or something like that. All right. There's just two fields in it right now. So you can see, again, we're adding a lot more to the album class. We're adding a lot more stuff. And in the genre class, I think that it has just these first two things in there, and we're adding the other two. Does all that make sense? Now, when you look at this, what might look a little different is this one. Every genre can have one or more albums associated with it. That's why we've got the list there, which means we can have a list of albums, all right, in this case. So we're going to do that. When we get to this point right here, when we get to that point, we don't have to add the app data folder because remember, this is done for MVC3. When you did an empty project for MVC3, it did not include an app data folder. Now for MVC5, when you do an empty project, there is an app data folder. In other words, you've already got one. So there's no reason for you to add one. All right, but they show how you would do it. Now, what's going to be funky after that is this is so antiquated. Hopefully you realize we don't work with SDF files anymore. We work with MDF files. All right? So literally, instead of using that connection string, we'll use the one that I sent you. But we'll have to make a couple changes to it. And I will tell you what those changes are when we get there. Okay? All right. Then we have to add this class. This is kind of the coolest thing about doing it this way. We have to add another class. You can call it whatever you want, but typically you put entities on the end of it. And since we're working with the MVC3 Music Store, we call it Music Store Entities. All right? And what this does, this is the whole class. We don't have to add more to it. That's it. But there's a couple important things about it. The first is it inherits from what's called the DB context class. That's a big thing. So that says anything that's in that DB context class is now available, all right, to this class. And in here, what we're saying is, hey, we're going to be working with sets of data. Those sets of data are going to include albums, and they're going to include genres. But what putting these two lines in there in this class does is it's going to allow us to do CRUD. Create, read, update, and delete. All right. In this chapter, all right, all we basically do is we have the ability to create. All right. In the next chapter, we have the ability to go in and update and delete. All right. So the author even says that's all there is to it. Okay. Then when we add this, that file that I showed you that had all those records in it, that's typically referred to as seed data, S-E-E-D. What we're going to do when we get to that point, if you look up on the screen, is you're going to right mouse click on models, you're going to choose add, you're going to choose existing item, you're going to find that file because it's one of the ones that I sent you, and you want to make sure you put it in the models folder so it goes in right there. All right. Then the only other thing we have to do after that, if you look up on the screen here, is we have to add this. That's in our global.asax file, which runs the application start, here's a surprise, that file runs when you start the application. So what we're saying right there is we want to bring in that sample data file. Okay, now there's still other stuff we have to do, but that's making it available to our program. All right, then we're going to have to go in and start making some changes, such as, again, if you look up on the screen, this says we want to create a new instance of that music store entities class. All right, that thing I just showed you with the 2 lines with the lists in there. All right, then we're going to have to go in and start making some changes first to our store index. You may or may not remember this, but right now in your store index, what you have in there right now, we did this at the end last time we made that list that had disco and rock and something else in it, but we hard-coded that list of 3 elements in. We're going to get rid of those lines and replace those lines that were in there with just these 2 lines. And the key one is the first line, which says, I want you to dig through the database and I want you to find all the genres out there and I want you to add them to that list. Okay? That's what we're doing. And when we get done, if you've done it correctly, you will now have 10 genres in there instead of 3. Okay? Now it says we don't have to change the view template. We don't have to make a change to it because it's still going to be used like it was before. Now if you look on the screen, after we do this, that's what yours should look like. It now has the 10 genres in there. When you highlight any genre, it turns a bluish, like a medium blue color, and it's got an underline. And that's just the CSS they put in to do that. That's no big thing. All right, so we do that. After we do that, then we have to update both the browse and the details methods. All right, so the author says we could do something like this. All right, but they said don't type this in yet because they're going to make it even easier for you. All right, me speaking here, not in your handout, but this is me speaking. One of the hardest things to explain, I understand it, but I'm not going to lie to you. My understanding is this term right here. And whether you realize it or not, in many ways, it's called lambda. All right? You've already worked with lambda expressions, somewhat. And what I mean by that is, if you remember last fall, we worked with JavaScript. And when we got into JavaScript, after we got into it a bit, we looked at anonymous functions, functions that didn't have a name. That sort of is like using lambdas. All right? But we'll go over it again, but they talk about what lambdas are in here. In English, what this is saying is, hey, I want you to go through these genres. I want to find a single genre in there, and I want its name to be disco in this example. This actually right here, this equal sign followed by that greater than sign, you can actually read this in books. They call that a fat arrow. All right? Just because of the way that it kind of looks. And the fat arrow typically means that you're using lambda expressions. All right? All right. So we're going to do that, but we're going to write it more generically. What does that mean? That means whatever genre we just clicked on, okay, that's what I'm going to want. So it says retrieve the genre and its associated albums. Bless you. Again, we have not technically written a database. We wrote 3 classes. We have an album.cs class, an artist.cs class, and a genre.cs class. We're going to have to go and add more fields to those so they map up with the database that's in the sample data.cs file. All right, but once we do that and we bring that file in and we let the application start method know we're using that file, boom, we don't have to technically write a database. All right? So we're going to have to, as it says, we'll have to go into the browse method. And after we go into the browse method, we'll have to update the view. Okay? Then we'll do the exact same thing. So after we do that, you do this. It still isn't perfect, but if you browse to right there, you'll have to put in browse to genre jazz. It should show you what's shown on the screen. Those are all of the albums that exist in our database under the jazz genre. Does that make sense? And then after we do that, we're going to have to do a similar thing to details. In that we're going to change details to this, and after we do that, and you put in the detail, it should show you that album. You may or may not remember this, but when we looked at this last week and we put in something like this, I think we put in details 5, and all it said was album : album 5. That's the way it reads right now. We don't want that. We want it to say album, and we want the name of the album. And it's pulling that information right from the database. Does all that make sense, or at least conceptually, does that make sense? And that'll be it. Okay? All right. So, we're just going to take it from the top. I'm in absolutely no hurry to get done with this, because I'm going to tell you about all my foibles, which is another word for saying all the screw-ups I've had with part 5 of this. Okay? And I'm going to show you some of them in just a bit too. So, again, we want to do the database access. We want to do the framework code first. So the first thing we're going to have to do, what I'd like you to do, is to open up your artist class. So in other words, how do you do that? You may or may not remember. You go over to models here. Everything else can be closed that might be open. Come on, stretch, would you? You what?
We don't have an artist class, so you'll have to add.
All right, that's fine. If you don't have an artist class under models, if you don't have one under models, it looks like I don't either, then we'll add it. So we will right mouse click on models, choose add class. Right mouse click on the models folder, choose add, choose class, click on class, and we'll want that to say, not that, artist.cs. All right, if you did it correctly, it's going to look like this. All right, and then they show you here, so I'm just going to copy it so I don't screw it up. Now everybody should have it, so just paste that in. Oh, I don't know how that ended up down there, but it did. So that's what it should look like when it gets all done. So every artist will have a name and an ID. You could make all sorts of, you raise your hand. I'm just wondering, why did they put name in there? Why didn't they put in first name and last name? And I would tell you to have to ask John Galloway, who wrote this article, that question. I wouldn't have done it like this, because some people might put it in first name, last name. Some might put it in last name, comma, first name. That's confusing. So I would have had it as at least 2 different fields. They didn't. So we're just going to work with what we've got. All right? Any questions on that? Anybody not able to do that? All right. Then let's go, and we're just going to keep following this. So now we all should have an album class. You can leave the other one open. It's not going to hurt anything. But just right mouse click on album. In fact, you don't even have to do that. Just double click it to bring it up. There it is. Right now, mine at least has title in it and genre. I believe yours looks just like this. We want to change it so it looks like this. Now you have 2 things you can do. You can manually type that, which is fine. All right. Amin's eyes got really big, so I don't think he wants to type that if he doesn't have to. So if you don't want to type it, you can open up a browser window. Come on. Open up a browser window. Let me make that a little smaller. And go out to here, which is the path to where that is. All right. And you can find it and then copy it to the clipboard. I don't care which way you do it. You can say, well, is one better than the other? No. Well, I think the way I did it was better because I didn't have to type anything. It's funny. I was talking to Ryan Schaefer-Cotter, the guy who teaches over there between classes, and we were talking, and he said, "You have anybody who really types slow in your classes?" So of course I had to smile and say, "Well, we've got some people who are probably not the fastest typists in the world." And he said how he doesn't have a lot of patience sometimes, and he's got students who will ask him a question and they're typing real slow, so he literally leans right over them and he'll be typing with one hand. And they always say, "Mr. Schaefer-Cotter, you type faster with one hand than I do with two." And he's like, "You think?" But he doesn't say that to him. He told me there was something, again, if you do want to learn to type faster, and I don't know what it is, but it's like called like type car or type race car. Type racer, thank you. And it'll put something on the screen and you type it. The faster you type it, there's a little car on the screen, the faster the car will go. All right? I mean, I talked to you about Mavis Beacon, and he laughed. And actually, Ryan, he actually used to work for Microsoft. He was out in Seattle. All right? And he told me how when he was at one of his interviews, they asked him questions, and literally the person giving the test, he had to type some stuff in, was standing right behind him. And one of the things they were watching was, could he type and how fast could he type? And he's like, "I don't think I should be one of these people." All right, so I'm taking for granted that you all got this if you did want it. All right, but again, this is it otherwise if you want to type it. Again, the biggest problem with typing it is if you make a mistake, stuff can get screwed up. Couple things we have not looked at yet. Again, notice this. Genre from right there is from our genre table. Artist from right there is from our artist table. Does that make sense? All right. And we are not going to use this, just so you know. Not right now. That our album artist URL. So when we end up making something in a little bit, we're going to have to take that part out of what we make. Does that make sense to you? All right. It's in the database, but we're not going to be displaying it if we're going to follow the steps that are in here. All right. And again, if you're still typing, you got to learn to type faster. And I don't know any other way to say it to you other than you got to learn to type faster. All right. So I'm going on because otherwise you're going to have to go to that URL that I just showed you, or put it in later or whatever. All right. Okay. Now we've got to go to the genre class. So we want to open that one up. So I'm going to double click on genre.cs. Now it has only a name in it. Fortunately, there's only 4 things we want to put in there, and one of them is the name. You do need the stuff to be in this order. Does this make sense to everybody? This is mapping up to a database. So if you flipped and put name first, it's going to try to grab one of those numbers that are in there for the name, and it's going to blow up when you go through this. It's got to be in this order. And remember all this get set stuff, because next semester, in that first month or so that we go over Java, you're gonna be like, why don't they have just get sets like they have in C#? Why do we have to write so much more code? Because it's Java. And you do. So every genre will have its own ID, its own name, its own description, and there'll be a list of albums for every genre. Does that make sense? So again, when we went over the first 2 examples that we did, the to-do list and the ranking one that we did, both of those were database first. So we had to write the database, and then we went and created the model classes afterwards. Now we're doing code first. So we're doing we have first written the models, the classes, and now we're building the code, or the databases, the tables, etc. around that, for lack of better words. All right. So we don't have to add the app data folder. Does everybody know this? I'm asking you this question. That if we did have to add the app data folder, at least I've got one, I think you all do too, but let's pretend for just a minute you didn't have one, all right? So then you right mouse click on the name of the solution, you choose add, but you choose add ASP.NET folder. You don't want to do a new folder there. These are special ASP.NET folders. Notice that app data is grayed out, not app gray is dated out. No, app data is grayed out because we already have that folder. All right. If we wanted to add any one of these other ones, like an app code folder, for example, then we'd highlight that and it would be there. All right. But again, we don't have to do that. I just wanted, for completeness sake, to show you that. All right. So here's where the fun starts. What I'd like you to do is two things. First, I'd like you to go in your Solution Explorer here. I'd like you to go down to the very bottom, and I'd like you to find and make sure, because there's more than one web.config file. I want you to grab that one on the very bottom here, double click it so it comes on the screen and it looks like this. What's in this file, FYI, what's in this file, first of all, it's an XML file. It's an extensible markup language file. But what's in this file are all of the settings for they're global settings for this project. Did you hear that? So again, if you're ever asked what's in the web.config file that's at the root of the project, it's all of these settings that are project-wide. You can overwrite this, and I can go and add a web.config anywhere I want, and it'll overwrite. This is kind of like the global CSS file, where we can overwrite it with CSS using style on pages. It's kind of the same thing. All right. What we'll want to do is go down to the bottom of this file, the very bottom. I'm asking you this question. Do you all have this in there? Do you all have Entity Framework in there? If you don't, then my guess is, if you don't, look up on the screen then, if you do not, then my guess is, if you don't, we did this the other day as a class, but then what I'd like you to do, just to check, is to go up, right mouse click on your project name, MVC Music Store, go to Manage NuGet Packages, and under Installed, or under the links on the top, click the Installed and see if you see Entity Framework in there. All right? And you can always search for it there too by just typing in Entity, you have to spell it right, there, Entity Framework. And you'll notice, all right, it says, in that case I don't know why, but it says no packages found. Maybe mine's not there either. What's that?
There's no space in between, that's why it's not finding.
No, there's a space.
No, I'm saying like in the actual package itself, there's no space.
Gotcha. All right. So if that is not showing for you, and I don't know if yours is or is not, but let's say it's not, then you go over to where it says Browse, and you again type in Entity, all right? And then what it should show you in there is the Entity Framework, all right? Then you'd click on it. Notice I'm not going to uninstall it, but if I wanted to uninstall it and reinstall it, I could, all right? But then yours, if it just says install, click there, and that should put those lines in. All right? As always, Brady, thank you for the words of wisdom. All right. So what we want to do is right before the end of this file, look up on the screen, please. Right before that last configuration tag, hit Enter. All right. Then on the thing that I sent you last week that's on the 28th, that folder that says the 28th on it, I've got to clean this desktop up. That folder has got a file in it called connectionstrings.txt. The easiest way to do this is to just open that file in Notepad or in Notepad++. It doesn't matter. But open it someplace. Mine's real big. I'm going to shrink it down right now. There. So highlight the entire file. So highlight everything that's in it right here. Control-C to copy it to the desktop. Go back to your project and paste it in. Just like that. Now, as it is, we need to make some changes to it. Everybody hear that? As it is, we need to make some changes to it. I want to explain to you, this is a good news or a bad news, good news situation. The bad news is I have to explain this file to you. The good news is, with my understanding of it, the explanation will take about 30 seconds. All right? What this has in here is this is how you're connecting up to the database. Okay? And what you want to make sure of, if you look up on the screen, please, you'll have to for this. This should be just what yours looks like right now. Okay? But we've got problems in here. Like what? Like when we created the program, we created it on the 27th. And that's got the 22nd on it. It screws it up. Just have to take my word for it because that's how I found out. Now, if you want, you can put today's date in it. It really doesn't matter. Let's change that so it says 11:30. Okay? So we'll have that say 11:30. And if you keep going, look on the screen, a little later on in here, you've got to change that one too. So on this same line, you'll have to change that twice so that instead of having it say 11:22, it says here 11:30. Okay? That should fix any problems with that file that we have. Okay? Until we get to the next lesson. Because that lesson's filled with problems. I always wondered. I thought, there's a hell of a lot of developers out there who are more experienced than I am, that are better coders than I am. Somebody must have asked sometime or other, how come this thing was never upgraded to MVC 4 or MVC 5 or 6 or whatever? Okay? And it's because once you get into this lesson, stuff starts breaking on a regular basis. And you got to make all sorts of changes to it. So that's what we're going to have to do in just a bit. Now, if you have made those changes and you're happy, so you change both of those so that under initial catalog it says this. So it's got 2017 11:30. This is just the time. So that says it was done at 7:22 and 36 seconds. That really doesn't matter unless you put an invalid time in there. All right? But you want to make sure that initial catalog there says 11:30 and the one over here says 11:30. Okay? Now, are there other problems? I'm looking in here and I don't know of any, but there may be some. We'll have to look as we go on. We may have to come back into this file and change things. Like what, Jeff? We may have to make this capitalized. I don't know. We'll find out as we go. All right? The problem is I now have, I went in yesterday afternoon, I started again to do this. This is like my third or fourth time trying this project. All right? And I've got so many versions of it laying around, and some work and some don't work. Some work and break at a certain point. And that's why I'm trying to give it to you where we have to do as little rework on it as possible. So my hope is, go ahead and click your Save All icon, and we'll see if we have to make changes to it. If we do, we will. All right, so we just did this then. We went into web config. We added this. Again, I know we're not using 4.0. That's not what we're using. And this, they don't even have what they called compact edition anymore. All right, now it's Server Management Studio, and all the stuff has changed over time. And as I mentioned, it's no longer an SDF file, it's an MDF file. All right, so those are just some of the things that have changed. All right, so about a third of the way down, let's go till 1:30, then we'll take a break. What I'd like you to do, please, is go over to your Models folder. We've done this before. Right mouse click on your Models folder, right mouse click, choose Add, and choose Class. Look up on the screen to make sure you're doing it right. Right mouse click on the Models folder, choose Add, and choose Class. Everybody there? All right. We want to call this class Music Store Entities.cs. Hopefully you can read that okay. If you can't, it's in the handout. One word, Music Store Entities. Spell it right, please. Because this, there's going to be other files that are going to be dependent on this. So if you spell it wrong one place and you spell it right in another, it's going to screw stuff up when you try to link it up later. All right. So if you've got all that, just click Add. There's only 2 lines that we have to add in here. Let me grab them from here, and I'll give you a second to type them in yourselves. Right there. You've got to add these 2 classes that are in blue. And you'll notice it's giving you an error. We'll fix the error in just a minute. There's, right now, if I take my mouse and put it over this, it says the type or namespace DB set could not be found. Are you missing something? So I click down here, and you'll notice we want to do this first thing here that says using system.data.entity. So you can do one of 2 things. Again, please stop for a second and look on the screen. You can either manually type in here, hit enter, and type in using system.data.entity, which is fine. Or you can take your mouse, put it here, click the down arrow, and just choose the first option and have the system put it in for you. Either way will work. We're still not done. There's one last thing we want to do in here. All right, and that is this class, right now, we're going to have problems later unless we let the system know that this is a child of the DB context class. So to do that, we do this. We type in here, colon, big D, little b, big C, little context, like that. That should be everything that we have to put in for this. Again, that gives us the ability, as we talked about a little earlier, to do CRUD operations. CRUD is an acronym: create, read, update, and delete. So it'll allow us to read the records that are in there, eventually to insert new records in there, eventually to update current records in there, eventually to delete current records in there. All right, that's all we need for this. All right, so I'm going to go back to here. And it says that's it. There's no other configuration. By extending the DB base class, which is what they meant right here, by doing that, it says it's able to handle our database operations for us. I'll take that anytime. If you give me pre-written code, but you say it's been tested, there's no way that I could ever test my own code as much as Microsoft has pre-tested their own code. It just isn't going to happen. All right? So it says we will take advantage of a feature in the entity framework that adds the seed data. So we're going to do that right now. Then we'll take the break. All right? So what I'd like you to do is this. Don't worry about any of this stuff that's in here. Go back to your project. All right, everybody, go back to your project. Single click on your models folder. Then right click on your models folder and choose Add, Existing Item, and you will have to go in that same folder that I showed you before, the one that I copied to you. You're going to have the 1128. You're going to want to find this file. You notice how it's a hell of a lot bigger than the other files? Because that's got our database data in it. So find the file that's called sampledata.cs, click Add. If it works, it put it right there. That's where you want it, in your models folder, down at the bottom. If you try doing that, you think you did it correctly, but for some reason it ain't working, you've got to let me know. So again, if you fell behind there, we right mouse clicked on models, we chose Add, we chose Existing Item, and we found from our 11/28/2017 folder that's on your desktop or someplace else, we found the file called sampledata.cs. We clicked that, we chose Add, and I'm not going to choose it because I already have it, and it put it down here. All right? Then the other thing we want to do, please again look up on the screen. We can now close our models folder for now. We can close, if you got any other folders open, you can close them for now. All right, but I want you to find this file right here, global.asax. Single click on it, which opens it. All right, then, and I'm going to give you the line, so just give me a second here. If you're going and copying the stuff in yourselves, that's fine, but you're going to have to make sure the caseness is correct on this. This, I believe mine is a big MVC. So if you followed my naming conventions, all right, why am I getting that? Does not exist in the namespace. Are you missing a reference? Well, hopefully that'll fix itself. Sometimes these do. All right. But that's the line that I added. It's one line. I put it over 2 lines, and so did they in the book. If you want to type it all on 1 line, you should be able to. If you just stop for a second and look on the screen, because I'd like to show you something, all right? And don't watch me, but just look on the screen. Had we typed in this, don't make this change, but had we typed in this, had I typed in right here, using MVC, MVC music store dot models, okay? Had we typed that in, okay, this line right here, okay? We wouldn't need any of this. Does that make sense to you? You use a using statement because if you've got things that you're going to be typing in a lot, we're referencing a library method here. But if we did it like this, we wouldn't have to be doing that. So if I was using that all over the place in my code, I think that's the only place they have you use it. So that's why they have you do it like this. Right? Still not sure why we've got that underline there, but I'm hoping it's going to, sometimes these work their way out. All right? So we're going to take a break. Before we do, would you please just do one thing? Everybody, click your double disk icon, which is Save All, and do a build solution. You shouldn't get any errors. We're not going to run this or anything yet. All right? I just wanted us to stop right there. But now all of our changes that we have put in have been saved. So it says, at this point, we've completed the work necessary to configure the entity framework for our project. We are about halfway done with this. All right, with this lesson. Let's take a break. It's 1:30. Let's come back at 1:45, and we'll see how much of the rest of it we can get done before our next break. All right.